Elib Kaldaif tried to differentiate the reflection of his face and the rest of the onboard cafe behind him from the normally incredible view of the planet they were approaching. The long journey back from the Mindform training monastery was nearing its end. The week or so of interplanetary travel in the returning city-sized starship had given him plenty of time to become thoroughly disappointed with himself. He had failed to master the Mindform arts that so many of his people he knew seemed to pick up so easily. One generation previously, and contrary to the then popular scientific view of reality, every intelligent creature in the few worlds that had been colonized since short-range interstellar travel had been achieved suddenly knew something they couldn't ever have conceived. It was a kind of implanted knowledge, like a universal revelation. It detailed a very specific type of thought projection. It was also a suddenly and unanimously known fact that it was essential for a small but significant percentage of their population to learn and master its practice. Those familiar with the relevant sciences guessed that this technique would amplify a so far only speculated tendency of space-time to corrugate and geometrically fold at a subatomic level. Reinforced by thousands of people willing the same thought construct, synchronized like a great orchestra, the effect would become measurable and even visible with enough minds projecting in unison. The second part of what came to be known as the Great Reception was the idea that when this Mindform effect was overlaid with a swiftly turning wheel of confined artificial singularities in the correct configuration, it would create a resonance on the space-time surface that would allow matter to traverse through vacuum's membrane into a coexisting spatial environment. Where this knowledge suddenly came from and how it was implanted in everybody's minds at the same moment was no easier to guess than the motivation of whoever had sent it, not to mention what might be found in the realm on the other side of vacuum's membrane. The only thing that was definite was that it had to be done. And so the Order of Mindform Monks was established. Everyone knew the steps involved, but it still required many years of training and practice, and even then not everybody could achieve competence. Simultaneously, every spare monetary unit was put into researching the high technology required to build a singularity wheel. Artificial singularities, essentially small black holes, had been employed in existing propulsion technologies used to travel between nearby stars, but nothing like this had ever even been considered. Capital Planet was a beautiful and peaceful world with a large fraction of its land masses set aside as reservations for its native plant and animal life. It was seen as a representation of higher aspects of Obscurian civilization, and was not really used for much real industry. The approach to standard orbit came and went, while Elib stared through the view in his melancholy. It wasn't the end of the world in spite of his mood. The strangest phase of his civilization's history was about to reach its climax. The circular arena that had been prepared for the combination of the mind-form projection and the singularity wheel was a famous sports venue used to host Olympic-style events and easily accommodated the attending 50,000 mind-form adepts who sat on the grassy banks which sloped down to the technological assembly at the centre. After an uneventful planetfall in the shuttle, Elib Kaldave arrived, still depressed. But at least he was in good time and found a seat with a pretty good view of the rings of kneeling mats inside the public viewing tiers, where the monks would perform. Looking further down the concentric slope of the massive arena, he could see the singularity wheel dormant, but with technicians hurrying around, finalising and checking. The amount of power that would be transmitted here from the deep space vacuum harvesters would be enough to melt a sizable area of the crust of the planet. He felt an atmosphere of trepidation just from this fact, never mind what his civilization would find on the other side. Shortly after the monks arrived, the globes on the singularity wheel started to accumulate energy. The ground vibrated in spite of the dampening fields at the base of the superstructure. Most of the audience were just staring at the monks as they sat still, eyes closed and seemingly serene, preparing for the task ahead. The sonic vibrations from the singularity wheel increased in pitch until they were beyond the sensory limits of those present. Without a visible cue, the monks started to align their minds. Some of their faces betrayed their intense concentration. The drone increased the emotional tension in the air. Some people, worried, started to look this way and that. The faintest of geometric patterns became visible, connecting the globes, just fluctuations in the view beyond the structure. A new, louder sound, this time from the machine, as its globe's contents passed into darkness, lost forever in their event horizons. Slowly, the great wheel began to turn. As it turned, it dragged the geometries with it, distorting the view behind. Gravitational pulses tugged the onlookers by the gut, but were quickly nullified by the machine. Winds blew in. The wheel spun faster. The geometries twisted and seared, now looking more like a spiral web, spun between the now barely visible singularity globes. The centre of the wheel seemed clear of distortion, but on much smaller scales, this was where the mind-form gravity effect was beginning. The vacuum membrane was thinning. High above the atmosphere, the launch platform had been waiting for the signal to release the dropship. Inside the cramped craft, the three crew had, through training extended well beyond the standard mindform syllabus, suppressed the natural terror of the complete unknown of their imminent voyage. The signal came, and with a horrible jolt, they felt the platform project them in a fast spin, straight towards the exact centre of the machine, in the arena on the planet's surface below. The dropship spun and shrieked through the atmosphere towards the wheel. Some of the monks had passed out, but most of them were still in the deep trance. Very little was audible above the deafening wind and shrieks of the incomprehensible phenomenon whirling inside the wheel. Necks stiffened as the audience that weren't hypnotised by the view of the spiralling vortex strained to see the dropship. It would only be seen for a few seconds. There it was, just a distant glowing streak amongst the wispy clouds in the beautiful sky. Down its street, perfectly timed as the whole synthesis of thought and otherworldly engineering reached its tumultuous zenith. In an instant, the ship phased through the insanely distorted spiral of mind geometries and gravity stretches, and disappeared without a trace. As the pilots of the dropship regained consciousness, their heart rates didn't slow, as they frantically tried to make some kind of sense of the unrecognisable spatial phenomena they were witnessing through the viewports. Space itself seemed to glow and contort around the enormous, strange, morphing and merging fluid objects that sparkled as they passed through each other and seemed both impossibly close and distant at the same time. All contact with Capital Planet had been lost. They had been in this strange realm for only a few minutes, but they had already travelled a distance that would normally have taken a month. They refused to believe their instruments, but after careful checking it was true. They looked at each other, realising things were not good. Maybe the mind form effect could help. The moment they synchronised thought forms, the ship spiralled and plummeted at a maddening velocity into and through one after another of the mysterious and massive objects. It was obvious that the mind form effect in this strange reality interacted with matter a lot more obviously than in normal space, seemingly reversing the effect of inertia on matter, the tiniest force multiplying their speed and direction by amazing amounts. Also, the speed of light was no longer an obstacle. The mind-boggling spatial scenery didn't seem to cause any resistance in their faster and faster accelerations. The accuracy of the coordinates of where they had originally emerged had become useless. They were lost, having travelled an unmeasurable distance, further than they could ever hope to retrace. The loss of the first explorers was terrible, but quickly turned to pride, and the pilots became honoured heroes as the techniques and technologies involved in breaking into and navigating through anti-inertial, or A-space as it came to be known, and more importantly, returning to normal space, were duplicated countless times and eventually mastered. Generations passed, and thousands of anti-inertial spheres, some carrying hundreds of crew, were routinely launched, exploring the newfound vastness of both normal and A-space. Much was discovered of long-dead and thriving planet-bound civilizations, and of the nature of the membranes that separate the different levels of space. Of note was the fact that as one travels beyond the edge of the observable universe, and then multiples of that distance, measured in time spans, aspects of the reality canvas start to change. Universal constants drift. Time, matter and space behave slightly differently. The phenomena observed by the thousands of explorers didn't even have names or any kind of scientific theories to explain what they were. On the last of these great spherical ships, Grand Monk Navigator Katsin Senatsid oversaw the re-entry into normal space at the record distance of 10 to the power of 80 time spans from home space. The ship's huge spherical hull slowly glided through the reality membrane, following the spectacular concentric geometries of the mind-form projections from the monks on board. It didn't take long for him to realise all was not well. The time gradient sensors were showing negative flow, and their internal singularity wheel was radiating erratic gravity waves. At minute magnifications, if they had been looking, they might have seen the start of the dimensional chain reaction caused by the incompatibility between the A-ship's spatial structure and the distant area of space where they had emerged. The Obscurium ship's reality canvas was creating a paradoxical feedback loop with local space-time. The effect was relatively slow at first, but like a nuclear reaction, it was a runaway effect. Once spotted, the only course of action was to run. With the singularity wheel still spinning and the monks in position, their escape back into A-space was swift. What they left behind was an abomination. The chain reaction was diverting the flow of space-time slightly into the past, into a hidden dimension. The result of this was the complete destruction of not just the matter and energy, but the actual space through which it expanded, leaving a dimensional discontinuity surrounded by an infinite gravitational gradient, not unlike a black hole, swiftly engulfing the surrounding space, whether or not there is matter to feed it. From the safety of A-space, the crew of the last great ship could see the violent spherical ripples in the spatial membrane that they had just traversed, and knew at least how destructive and fast the cataclysmic explosion was. The unfathomable distance from home space made them feel safe in the knowledge that even though the dimensional asymptote was expanding at many times the speed of light, it would still never threaten any of their colonies. Katsin and his crew travelled in a panic for what seemed like an age. They finally entered a region still hundreds of light years from home space, but close enough for communications to be possible. After transmitting details of the terrible events, they prepared to re-enter A-space for the final leg of their journey home. Grand Monk Katsin settled, quietened his thoughts, and initiated the mind-form construct. The 1,000-strong lesser monks felt his cue and joined in, strengthening and adding complexity to the still invisible geometry, circling a point of space just ahead of their giant vessel. He could feel the vibrations and gravitational pulses in his diaphragm caused by the faster spinning singularity wheel, many decks below the navigational temple. He kept steady in his concentration and lead role in the ritual. The science magic reached its zenith as, at the focal target of the machines and minds, reality's membrane thinned to almost nothing. The A-sphere started its routine acceleration into the weakened space ahead. Instead of the well-practiced smooth transition into A-space, it happened again, The dimensional essence of the A-sphere had been tainted by the paradox, but had remained dormant in the absence of the extreme conditions now returning. The Grand Monk, his crew, their ship, and the area of space-time they occupied were horribly stretched and torn into nothingness at microscopic level. The paradox was reborn, expanding in all directions, turning matter, energy, distance, and duration into the null. The terrible blackness radiated a searing radial stream of event horizon radiation as the quantum foam was ripped apart in the spatial tsunami. Before its expansion started to approach the speed of light, neighbouring colonies and nearby ships detected the dazzling beacon of radiation. From its position and the recent panicked communication, it was obvious what had happened. The problem was that this time the entire Obscurian civilization was within range of the expanding null paradox. In a matter of a generation, it would destroy half of the inhabited colonies and the surrounding star systems. They couldn't all run. Maybe a few 100,000 could get away via A-space. But there were billions, not to mention their beautiful worlds that would be left behind. Over the next few years, there was a period of quiet dread as the terrible news was absorbed into the colony's cultures. There was a lot of talk, speculation about what could be done to save the worlds, but the overwhelming undercurrent was that all was lost. $18 billion years earlier, there was an event that was assumed by most to have been the beginning of everything. The event was the source of all space, energy, matter, and time, expanding from an infinitely small point in nowhere. There was no before this event. It started everything. This, however, was not the case. The event was in fact caused by a symmetric temporal collapse, the ending of another everything, the stopping of another time, the condensation of all space and its contents to an infinitely small point, all before time, as the Obscurians understood it, even existed. During this previous existence, through trillions of years of transformation, the inhabitants of this reality before reality had advanced so far that their consciousnesses did not need bodies. They had adapted their universe's structure to host their combined awarenesses in the essence of their reality, effectively turning their universe into their body and mind. The second revealed message to all sentient life in the universe was as clear as the first one. Build a bridge to our time stream. We will build a bridge and meet you at time zero. We will repair your universe. Know how to do this now. The mind-formed geometry codes and the behemoth technology specifications required to stretch a region of space back to time zero were instantly known by all. The bridge would create an isotemporal tract of space between a specific epoch in the previous universe to the present. It would navigate safely around the Genesis event, avoiding its infinite energies and microscopic dimensions by using techniques far beyond their sciences. The governing bodies of the Obscurian colonies had no choice but to cooperate. The swiftly advancing catastrophe would convert all to its null horror so soon. following years saw the cooperation of all the colony star systems. Even the most reclusive planets joined in. Orbital refineries were built to manufacture the strange materials that were to make up the concentric array of much larger singularity wheels that would form and line the time bridge. The Mindform monasteries were oversubscribed with hopeful volunteers, learning the more sophisticated projections that would hopefully combine with S-wheels to make the revealed temporal tunnelling a reality. No one knew what they would find at the end of the temporal bridge at time zero. But this didn't really matter, because the mood across the colony star systems had shifted to great excitement and hope. The survival of everything they knew. Caldaith, now 20 generations older, decided to reapply to a Mindform monastery near Capital Planet and was accepted. This time he managed to get the hang of it and excelled, helped by the experience gained by the Grand Monk instructors through the many generations since the first reception. Just under half a generation in, it was looking hopeful that he might be one of the elevated monks that would be stationed on one of the Time Bridge platforms. Eventually, the effort and optimism paid off, and the combined worlds of the Obscurian metaculture were ready to attempt the meeting with the bridge on the other side of time zero. The concentric singularity wheels twinkled occasionally, tilted away from the nearby lightly populated moon system, circling round the ringed gas giant. It reflected the light from twin suns of the star system that had been specified by the revelation. Around and in between the S-wheels, the habitation platforms were staggered, interleaved and stacked, housing 100,000 technicians, coordinators and monks. It was a fragmented but perfectly aligned city, built for the sole purpose of powering the impossible act of dragging an area of space against the time stream's current into the past to the meeting point at time zero. The inner rims of the platforms were lined with single curved windows, arcing for miles around the S-wheels, giving a perfect view of the target of their meditations. The monks were milling around finding their allocated kneeling mats as the time for the Mindform procedure drew near. Elib Caldaith had overslept slightly in his very basic quarters. He rushed to the tube car which brought him to his allocated area and made his way to his section whilst listening to the announcements of regiments being reallocated due to failed and unfinished areas of the habitation platforms. There was the same underlying worry present in the air that he had felt all those years ago as a young man when he watched the first sphere plunge into A-space. This time, though, there was the sense of optimism, the hope that these entities, whoever they were, might be able to save them from the onrushing null space explosion. He found the correct windowed segment that seated around 300 monks. Most of them were already getting settled or staring out the wide arced window at the view. It was an incredible sight. The S-wheels, the inner platforms, the nearby ringed gas giant, and the breathtaking backdrop of the expansive blue nebula beyond. Finally sitting in the well-practiced meditation position, he didn't have much time to settle before he heard the announcement signifying the start of the initial phase. Closing his eyes and carefully altering his state of consciousness, the growing alignment of the army of monks became perceptible. The initial phase was solely to align thought patterns. Back at the training monastery, the sensation was quite reassuring, but in this 1,000 times bigger ritual, it threatened to overwhelm. There were so many thoughts, all with the same shape and direction. Now the geometry phase started. Elib didn't really have to discipline his thoughts much at this stage. He was just more power for the mass projection. The new thought direction surged in from all around his awareness. He could see the S-wheel array in the collective vision that they all shared. The neon web of conjoined geometries, not there yet, but the intention of where they would appear was implicit. The sensations of being a physical life form were very far away now for the monks, as their minds were woven into one incorporeal entity with one motivation. It sought to feel the soon-to-appear gravity resonances, to slide its thoughts around the micro-contours of space-time, to find the lever points, to stretch and to tease their environment downwards and inwards and backwards into the past. The innermost ring of the S-wheel array activated, disturbing the meta-thought form slightly, as the weight of the monks in the innermost platform tripled for a moment, until the dampening field compensated. In the minds of the monks, the neon circular geometry sprang into existence, webbing around the inner S-wheel, spangling and shimmering with an ethereal lightness that denied the magnitude of the imminent procedure. The coordinators, observing the ritual from the outermost city platform, in awe watched the red-shifted colour distortion and warping of their view of the central regions of the disc. The next S-wheel out started spinning, faster than the first, anchoring the surrounding reality fabric to it as it accelerated into the past. The third and fourth rings, and the associated mind-form geometries activated in succession. The bumps and jolts to the monks' physical bodies became more painful and distracting as the time fabric around them rippled and strained. The monks on the innermost platform were now over 1 billion years in the past, compared to the edge ring, their reference frame accelerating more with every passing local minute. From Elib's section's point of view, the S-wheels inward of their ring were impossibly far away, and yet closer than the other side of the great disc. The colour distortion was increasing too, with searing ribbons of mind form being drawn from behind them into the now darkening centre. The singularity wheel just inside Elib's platform activated. His thoughts exploded in tandem with the thousands of monks on the same ring, with intense, infinitely expanding mandalas. Their bodies and the platform structure screamed as gravitational pulses streaked through them, and they started to fall into the past, faster and faster. immeasurable amount of time before all this, in the universe that spawned the one that the Obscurians inhabited, a multifarious mind occupied every spatial extent and every atom. Its brain was made up of the things that used to be stars, black holes, and galaxies. It began to warp a tract of space-time into its own future, avoiding its doomed destiny. It was both a trillion minds and one mind. Its thoughts were described by the quantum fluctuations of the electrons around atomic nuclei and by the slow turning and twisting of 100 billion galactic megastructures. Its memories were the actual events that had happened, which it could revisit by stretching time as easily as a physical life form could recall its name. There was one thing it could not survive: destruction of everything at time end. When its universe reached this, time, space, and energy would all be compressed into an everlasting, infinitesimally small point of nothing. No amount of reality fabric bending could avoid this cosmic terminus, so its last hope was rescue. Who could possibly rescue something which was easily as powerful as the mythical gods of old? Palphora Torsero tried to steady herself as another time stream eddy collided with and oozed through the centre platform. The sickening dizziness of the time stream turbulence eventually passed, and she looked around at the interior of the primary contact disc. She and her crew were on the massive platform at the very centre of the S-wheel array. The 1,000 or so monks were all seated facing the centre, towards the 50-metre circular cutaway section in the centre of the floor. This was the focal point of the entire ritual. They were going to be the first to witness the joining of the time streams, to meet with their self-proclaimed saviours who supposedly had the tech magic to halt the null paradox disaster that the Obscurians had unleashed in their unchecked explorations. Palphora Torsero was the Prima Grand Monk Mindform Coordinator. It was her job to synchronise the mindform projections from the centre platform with the surrounding platforms and coordinate the main conjuration with her troop of adepts. The blue shifted and contorted view outwards to the other circling platforms and S-wheels would have threatened the strongest of minds with its impossible distances and speeds. However, everyone's attention was now on the circular section at the centre of the platform. The surrounding monks' singularity wheels and the intricate mindform spatial geometries were all focused at the exact centre. The time stream gradient funneling through the focus point spanned millions of years of time with each metre of space. The distinctive rising vibrational frequencies hailed the approaching apex. Sparkling streamers of temporal flux exploded out from the point of universal meeting, rupturing the stasis field that protected the onlookers. The entire mind-formed geometrical construct that had been dragging the S-wheel array back in time was thrown outward, vaporizing to nothing. But the infinitesimal aperture that they had created to the mysterious universe from before time zero stayed open. Gravitational waves started to pulse outwards, breaking up the platforms and destabilizing the S-wheels. In her last moments of consciousness, Palphora Torsero wondered how long it would take the light depicting their doom to travel back out across the time bridge. But instead of being killed by the vacuum of space, or burned to a cinder by the radiation now saturating everything, there was a final booming pulse. Waves of mindform essence flowed from the temporal link, reconfiguring reality as it travelled, paving the way for the inconceivable intelligences and powers that would follow. Space at quantum scales was being rebuilt and reprogrammed. Nothing was left unchanged. The pulse raced outwards, up through the time bridge. Everything inside it changed to unrecognizable phases of energy. From one of the platforms further out from the focus, Elib Kaldaf watched the almost infinitely slowed down version of the preceding events. It seemed slow because of the massive temporal gradient between him and the point of contact. The outpouring devastation was starting to speed up as it crept outwards towards Elib's present. There was no time to do anything. The blinding pulse accelerated and consumed Elib's platform, subatomic particles easily coming apart and reassembling to create nanoconduits, geometrical mind-form junctions, and an infinitude of the other tech magic constructs that were needed to support the approaching alien presence. A billion years passed, and the universe that the Obscurians and a multitude of other life forms knew was eventually completely processed and occupied by the invaders. Yet as a side effect of the combination of alien magic and technology that they had practiced in their final years, there was a residue, a shadow of the essence of the Obscurian monks and everything that they were, an abstract mind disassociated from anything familiar, connected to and moving within the alien spatial constructs. Greetings, Obscurian superconsciousness. A decatrillion years ago, we were like you. We needed biological bodies and electrochemical brains to house our minds. We needed a planet to support and multiply those bodies, and a star to feed our planet. During a time beyond your understanding, we learned to escape the prison in which we had evolved, and to tame space, time, and reality to be our new body. However, your mind form is unstable. Because of this, your mind form cannot be integrated with us. The remains of the Obscurian struggle for existence must be extinguished to ensure there's infinite continuation of the elder mind form that is called human.